And welcome back, everybody. On this episode of the Rugby Review, we're going to be going through round 16 of the URC, or the United Rugby Championship. And this is round 16 out of 18, so there's only 2 more rounds of the URC, regular season in the URC, to try and finalize that top 8 as we move into the playoffs here. So let's take a look at the game schedule for round 16. And the first slate of games, there were 3 games played on April 24th, and then the following day, April 25th, there were 5 games played. So we kicked off round 16 with a Welsh derby between Cardiff and Ospreys, and that game was followed by Edinburgh versus the Sharks. And then the third and final game on the 24th was between Zebra Parma and Dragons, so that's the battle of the bottom there, 2 bottom teams in the league. And then the following day, April 25th, we started off with 2 of the hottest teams in the URC with Lions versus Connacht. That game's followed by an Irish derby with Munster versus Ulster, which that game is followed by the battle of the 2 top teams in the league, Stormers versus Glasgow, and then we have Benetton versus Leinster, and to round off round 16, we're finishing with Scarlets versus the Bulls. And so let's take a look at the final results of the round here. So again, we started off with Cardiff versus Ospreys, where Cardiff was able to secure a victory over the Ospreys by a score of 24-21. And we're going to look at the stat line here real quick. Super close game, super competitive game between both of these teams. For most of the game, Cardiff was the much stronger, much more dominant team. And then about the last 10, maybe 15 minutes of the game or so, Ospreys got a good bit of momentum to close the game and actually almost came back and won the game. We'll say one of the main things that kept the Ospreys from winning this game was their ill discipline during the course of the game. Not that Cardiff was too much better, but 16 penalties overall for the Ospreys. In addition, Ospreys had 2 yellow cards plus a 20-minute red card during the course of the game. It's just literally that's half of the game played down a man or 2. So, Ospreys were close to winning, but ill discipline made it more challenging for the Ospreys than it needed to be. But good for Cardiff to hold on and secure this victory. Definitely helps them solidify their spot in the top 8 as we move into the last 2 rounds here. And then we'll take a look at it when we look at the leaderboard at the end, but I think Ospreys mathematically still have a chance of getting in. They'll just need to win out the rest of the season. So let's move back to the results here. So the following game was again battle of the 2 bottom teams of the league between Zebra and Dragons. Super close game. There's not much on the line as far as playoff implications go, but as far as a point of pride in trying to represent your club in the best possible manner, these teams played a very close, very competitive game where the Dragons just edged out Zebra by 1 point. Dragons secured the victory by a score of 19-18 in this particular game. And our next game between Edinburgh and the Sharks, super close game. This game does have some playoff implications to it. So Edinburgh won a very close game over the Sharks by a score of 33-28. And so let's take a look at the stat line with this game. And again, super close game, super competitive game, very back and forth game, especially in the first half. In the first half, one team would score and then the other team would answer. One team would score, and then the other team would answer. If I remember correctly, it was tied at halftime 14-14. And then very close game for like 15, maybe 20 minutes into the second half. Almost no scoring took place, and then Edinburgh scored 3 quick tries in like 10 minutes. Built up a really big lead, and it looked like Edinburgh was going to have a very comfortable margin of victory and kind of blow out the Sharks, but good on to the Sharks. They, fought to the very end, made a couple of quick scores at the end of the game to get them within 7 points. So, again, very competitive game, very fun to watch, back and forth game. Edinburgh secured the victory, and then with a late effort by the Sharks, they were able to not only get a losing bonus point, but also get a try-scoring bonus point as well. So those 2 extra points for the Sharks could be a very, very, very big deal, very, very helpful as we move into the last 2 rounds here. So let's move back to the final results here. And the last game in our left column here is a bit of a surprising result for me. I would have figured that this game would have been much closer, but this was a complete blowout, complete domination by the Stormers in this particular game over Glasgow. Stormers won this game by a score of 48-12. To me, this is a big deal. These are the 2 top teams in the league playing against each other. Playoffs start in 3 rounds, and this is, I think, the second game in a row Glasgow has lost, and the Stormers are just dominating this game, giving the Stormers really good momentum heading into round 17, bonus point victory over Glasgow. So a lot of positive momentum for Stormers going into the next round, and Glasgow will definitely try to do a 180 with their momentum and get back into the winner's circle, so that way they don't fall further down the rankings over these last 2 rounds. Now our next game, the 5th game of round 16, was a game between two of the hottest teams in the URC. I think both of them had like a 5 or a 6 game winning streak coming into this round, in which we had the Lions versus Connacht. And the Lions were able to secure a very strong victory over Connacht by a score of 33-21. And so I also want to look at this stat sheet here, because I think this is going to be a very interesting one to look at, because as I was watching this game, the Lions were very much the more dominant team offensively and had a very strong defensive effort as well to keep Connacht from, there were a lot of times where Connacht would get into the 22, Lions would turn the ball over at the ruck and would win a penalty and relieve some pressure from, Connacht's offensive attack. And one of the big things that I found super interesting, and it's kind of a theme with the Lions throughout the course of this season, is the Lions don't need much possession, don't need much territory. They'll put in a huge shift defensively, but then the Lions will be the significantly much more effective, much more efficient, and clinical team offensively. And you can see this play out on this stat sheet here. Lions have less than 40% possession plus territory. They're having to make over 200 tackles, yet they're making about the same amount of meters as Connacht is. And the Lions ended up having 12 clean breaks during the course of this game to just 2 for Connacht, despite Connacht having 60+% possession plus territory advantage. So, really strong game for the Lions, securing the bonus point victory. And it just impresses me every single time I see, the Lions at such a disadvantage in the possession and territory stats. But Lions are not a team that need much possession, don't need much territory. If you give them an opportunity to counterattack on you, especially over the last few weeks, they're taking it, and they're just, honestly, they're just dominating at the moment. So a lot of good momentum for the Lions heading into the last 2 rounds here, and then Connacht is sitting just on the edge of the top 8, so then Connacht will definitely look to win these last 2 games of the regular season just to try to secure their spot in the top 8. So let's move back to the overall the final scores here. And so our next game after the Lions-Connacht game was an absolute blowout. It was the only other blowout during the course of this round in which we see Munster just dominating Ulster by a score of 41-14. If I remember correctly, this is the second round in a row where Munster's had 40-plus points scored and only 2 tries scored for the opposite team. So Munster has done a great job over the last couple rounds finding their footing offensively, scoring a bunch of points. And as we all know, Munster has always had a really strong defensive effort, which is playing out right now against Ulster. And then Ulster, they've lost the last couple weeks in a row and have gone from the 3 seed to the 8 seed. So Ulster, they probably were sitting a bunch of players just because they had their Challenge Cup semifinal game. But Ulster definitely needs to turn around their momentum and start getting some wins underneath their belt in these last 2 rounds of the competition. Otherwise, they might see themselves out of the top 8. Second to last game of the week, super close, super competitive game between the Scarlets and the Bulls. We see the Bulls edging out the Scarlets in this victory. Bulls won the game by a score of 23-21 over the Scarlets. This is a good road win for the Bulls. Again, gives them positive momentum heading into the last 2 rounds of the season. They definitely, the Bulls are floating right, or at least last round, they were floating right on the edge. They were the 8 seed. So this win definitely helps push them up a little bit in the rankings to kind of help secure their spot in the top 8. And then obviously Scarlets are just trying to finish the season on a high note and have some positive momentum going into the offseason. So losing bonus point, not the outcome we're necessarily looking for, but game was close, game was competitive. They didn't get blown out. So, that could be some positive momentum over the last couple rounds into the offseason as they kind of, see what they can build for, next year. And then the last game of the round, super fun game, super competitive game here, like a lot of these games have been. We see Benetton getting a home victory over Leinster, just edging out Leinster. So Benetton secured the victory by a score of 29-26. And that is the last game that we are going to take a peek at. And again, very close, very competitive game. And interestingly enough, this stat line resembles the Lions-Connacht game very much, because Benetton has a huge disadvantage in possession and territory. Benetton's having to make over 200 tackles during the course of the game, yet despite Benetton's disadvantage in possession and territory, having to make a lot of tackles, Benetton was the much more clinical, much more effective team. They did a better job of utilizing whatever ball they had, turning those opportunities into scores, and were able to secure a very good home victory over one of the top teams in the league in Leinster. And obviously for Leinster, I don't think this puts them in jeopardy of dropping out of the top 8, but they most certainly want to secure a home game for the quarterfinal at the very least. So, Leinster will make sure that they can turn the tides a little bit, get back in the winner's circle, and definitely try to secure that top 4 home quarterfinal matchup if they can. So that was the last game of the week of the round here. And let's take a look at the leaderboard, in which on the left side is the leaderboard after round 15. On the right side of the screen is the leaderboard after round 16. So there's been a lot of movement, a lot of shakeups to happen. So Glasgow Stormers have flip-flopped. So we have Stormers very, very narrowly sitting at the top of the table right now. Lions Leinster swap spots. So they're sitting there very comfortably. Not comfortably, but they're sitting at the 3-4 spot. So the Lions and Leinster, as it currently stands, have home quarterfinals for the playoffs. And the biggest mover I've seen from round 15 to round 16 is Ulster. In round 15, Ulster was sitting at the 5 spot, and now after round 16, they're sitting at the 8th seed, and they only have 3 points advantage over Connacht with 2 rounds to go. So again, Ulster kind of sitting in a precarious position right now after having lost a couple rounds in a row. So, Ulster will look to turn their momentum around and get a couple wins in the last couple rounds of the season here. And gosh, from a math standpoint, I don't really even think the Sharks and the Ospreys are. No, they can't. Even if Sharks win both games with bonus points, that brings them to 46. Ulster's at 47. So realistically, Connacht is the only team outside of the top 8 that can make a push into the top 8 over the course of these last 2 rounds. So we'll see how everything shakes up, and it'll be kind of exciting to see what the results are over these last 2 rounds. And so with that being said, let's look at round 17's game schedule. So there's going to be a 1-week break between round 16 and round 17. We've got the semifinals for Champions Plus Challenge Cup happening. So round 17 will take place the week of May 8th. And so on May 8th, there's going to be 2 games played. The first game is going to be between Glasgow and Cardiff, and that game will be followed by a very important game between Ulster and Stormers. Very important for Ulster to try to get a victory on this one. And then the following day, there's going to be 6 games played. The first game of the day is going to be between the Bulls and Zebri Parma, followed by Sharks versus Benetton. And then we're going to see a Welsh derby between the Ospreys and the Scarlets. That game will be followed by a top-of-the-table matchup between Leinster and Lions. That game, the Leinster-Lions game, will be followed by a super important Irish derby, not because it's an Irish derby, but because Connacht is sitting right at the edge, just behind Ulster in the 9 seed. So we're going to have Connacht versus Munster, super important game there, and then round 17 will be finished off between Dragons and Edinburgh. So that is it for this episode. Thank you all for listening if you made it this far in the episode. If you liked the video, please hit the like button. If you liked it enough to subscribe, please hit that subscribe button. And we will be back with the next episode, and stay tuned for round 17's recap in the URC. Have a good one.